Justice Sustainability Now. I'm also the state coordinator of a network called the Pennsylvania Network for Peace, Justice, and Sustainability. We have about 44 organizations across the state. They encompass a lot of different issues, but quite a large number of them are pro-Palestinian organizations. So I'm going to be talking about I have two statements, one about Senator Bob Casey, former Senator Bob Casey, and one about Senator David McCormick. And it is not for me to decide whether or not they're complicit in genocide. It's for you to decide, but I do have my opinions. I'm going to be talking about what evidence we have on them on that. So over the course of the last year, we had several meetings since October 7th with the Senator's staff, Senator Casey we're talking about. They were always polite and professional, while overall the support for Israel, and in particular President Biden's policies in that regard, were upheld and endorsed by the Senator in public statements and legislative action or lack thereof. There was a sense from the staff that the humanitarian situation was worth consideration. Judging from the Senator's past votes and positions, we had hopes that he would be supportive of our efforts to pass legislation to increase humanitarian aid access. So, for example, he did vote for legislation that supported humanitarian efforts in Sudan and in China and other places. While it was true that he got behind the Biden administration's efforts to increase aid, those fell far short of what was needed to address the situation, as we all know. He never supported our legislation, voted 3 times to allow military aid to Israel in support of their actions in Gaza. When it came to the actual support of the Israeli military operation, we were never able to move him on this issue either. His robust support for arming Israel, even with weapons that had direct ties to war crimes in the conflict, is testament to that. He went so far as to denounce the one time the Biden administration withheld arms from Israel over the past year, and that was large bombs that were very indiscriminate bombs. He made a statement during a talk he gave at the American Jewish History Museum, where he also applauded the University of Pennsylvania's decision to shut down student protests on campus. I personally buttonholed him at a fundraising event during his election campaign and suggested that support for Israel's actions would potentially hurt him in the elections, and that we wanted a dialogue regarding increasing humanitarian aid in the Strip. His response to me was to smile and tell me that we're working on that, implying support for Biden administration efforts to push Israel to increase humanitarian aid, which, as we all saw, was woefully inadequate. In official statements we received from his office, he did purport to support increases in humanitarian aid and a 2-state solution, but his actions were weak and tepid, in my opinion, on that front. Statements of support are not policy. Senator Casey's actions failed to provide relief to the victims of Israel's likely genocide, and by support of the Biden policy, which enabled this likely genocide, the senator, in our view, is guilty after the fact in likely genocide due to his sincere concern for the humanitarian situation. We think that, maybe his intentions were, not terrible, but they weren't. His actions just didn't add up to what he told us. We can only speculate, but my own belief is that the senator was constrained from acting on his instincts toward humanitarian relief by being locked into a deeply flawed political calculation tied to the view of his political party's leadership. So in conclusion, Senator Casey has criticized Israel's actions. He stated that Israel could do more to help address the humanitarian crisis, particularly regarding the provision of aid to Gaza. On the other hand, he has consistently opposed measures that would condition U.S. aid to Israel. Direct wishful sentiments toward Israel regarding humanitarian aid and the horror of the bombing and its inherent non-proportionality fall far short of compelling Israel to change policy toward Gaza. His inaction at times, and at other times his obstruction of dissent of U.S. policy, has enabled Israeli government actions. To the degree the U.S. policy supports an Israeli program that the World Court has found is committing acts that violate the Genocide Convention in Gaza, is the degree to which the U.S. government is complicit. In that respect, Senator Casey's actions and inactions help enable this. We cannot know if his belief that the Biden administration was credibly using what leverage it had to get Israel to support increased humanitarian aid was sincere, We do not know if the senator expected a different outcome than the one that occurred, and therefore we do not know if he was party directly to these likely acts, but that is to say genocide. But we can say, certainly, in my opinion anyway, with certainty that he enabled such an outcome and is therefore, on the face of it, guilty after the fact to help perpetuate this policy of the U.S. and Israel that resulted in what's going on today. That's Casey. Dave McCormick. So in January, in my capacity as the statewide coordinator of the Pennsylvania Network for Peace, Justice, and Sustainability, which I told you about, we reached out to the senator. We offered, congratulations on his electoral victory, and we included a formal request to meet with his national policy staff on a list of agenda items our members have in interest. These included both foreign policy and domestic policy concerns. Statements many of us have received from his office since then have called into question a lack of concern and action regarding these matters. Letters many of us received convey a sense of complicity with the clear autocratic effect of much of what the Trump administration was doing. This is true regarding U.S. policy with respect to Gaza as anything else. In his responses to constituents, the senator expresses callous disregard for the notion that Israel may be in violation of international law, and further embraces wholeheartedly the current U.S. policy, which has enabled Israeli violation of international law and what has amounted to a likely genocide, as we know. In these letters, the senator has justified votes he has taken against legislation which would either cut off weapons to Israel as a means of leverage, or that reinstate U.S. funding to UNRWA, or call on Israel to allow full humanitarian aid into the street. In these letters, the senator makes claims that are inaccurate, misleading, and simply false. And I can go over those, if you'd like, but I'm not going to spend time on that right now because it's pretty involved. But essentially, the sources he uses are very suspect. I'll mention two. Impact C. They're a very suspect source. They were formerly known as the Center for Monitoring the Impact of Peace. It's an Israeli nonprofit organization that monitors the content of school textbooks. McCormick cites that as one of the reasons why UNRWA is not allowed to get funding anymore, because supposedly, they're complicit in supporting Hamas, and that he claims in one of his letters that hundreds, if not thousands, of UNRWA staff are Hamas. That is not supported by any evidence that I've seen. This Impact C, which he draws his information from, the current CEO of the organization is Marcus Sheff, a former Israeli-British journalist and media executive. He's currently a major in the reserves of the Israeli Defense Forces, spokesperson of the IDF. These affiliations call into question the credibility of this monitoring that McCormick uses to justify his case. So pretty biased at the least. I won't go into any more of those details, but I'd be happy to answer questions. Overall, this shows a pattern of bias on the part of the senator, a bias toward the notion the Palestinian plight is synonymous with Hamas violence, which we don't believe is true. However, an independent panel released a report about the UN Relief Agency for Palestinian refugees, providing 50 recommendations and noting that the Israeli authorities have yet to provide proof of their claims that UN staff are involved with terrorist organizations. The UN Secretary General received the report, appointed an independent review group days after Israel announced the allegations against UNRWA. UNRWA, by the way, doesn't just support the Palestinians in Gaza. They support Palestinians, 5.9 million Palestinian refugees in the West Bank and Jordan and Lebanon and Syria and war-torn Gaza as well. So they've been the ones who've been taking care of Gazans since the 50s. Other statements made by the senator show a clear bias in favor of Israeli behavior. Just a few examples should suffice. For too long, this is a quote, "For too long, many UN agencies have hurled false accusations at and deliberately targeted Israel, serving as useful idiots for Iran and its terrorist proxies," McCormick said. "I'm proud to join Chairman Risch of our colleagues in unequivocally standing up to our great ally Israel and pushing back on anti-Semitism and anti-Israeli bias at the UN. So this was in support of the Stand With Israel Act, which was mentioned before. The federal version of this act essentially tilts the playing field in the UN. It basically says you're not allowed to, vote against Israeli atrocities at the UN. It's essentially what the bill is about. So he supported that as a co-sponsor, original co-sponsor. He's in Israel right now, Senator McCormick. He met with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. That's the group implementing the current American-Israeli Gaza aid plan, which has come under fire from international aid groups on the ground. McCormick spoke with Jewish Insider, it's a newspaper there, about the significant issues on his agenda, which was supporting this GHF, as they call it, this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Turns out that there's military contractors involved in that. Supporting this plan is tantamount to supporting ethnic cleansing of the Gaza population. According to an article in Mondoweiss, international aid organizations are calling this Israeli-U.S. plan to bring humanitarian aid to Gaza a political sham, a blueprint for ethnic cleansing. Meanwhile, the UN warns 14,000 babies could die within Gaza if Gaza does not receive the aid that they need. Under the plan, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a US-based organization, would handle the aid. Private military contractors would secure the distribution sites. The Israeli military would provide necessary security. In a letter from 11 humanitarian aid organizations in the area, they wrote, quote, "Let us be clear, the biggest barrier to humanitarian access in Gaza is not insufficiency or corruption. It is the deliberate restriction of aid by the Israeli government. The military siege on Gaza is a form of collective punishment. Restriction of aid is being used as a weapon of war." So these are the humanitarian groups on the ground that are saying this U.S.-Israeli plan that's being enacted right now is, excuse my unprofessional language here, bullshit. In February of this year, President Trump proposed a plan to move the people of Gaza to other countries and to send U.S. troops to clean out the Strip and develop it into a seaside resort. It's been called Gaza Lago, among other things. This would be on its face an act of ethnic cleansing. When asked about the plan, Senator McCormick's office refused to comment. So far as we know, at this time, Senator McCormick has yet to speak out against this plan. So far, after repeated attempts by me as the coordinator of the Pennsylvania network to set up a meeting, and after multiple phone calls, postcards from our members, weekly street demos in front of his Philadelphia office on Mondays, we have yet to hear from the Senator's office in any regard to setting up such a meeting. No response comes despite two in-person meetings with lower-level staff who guaranteed our requests would be shared with McCormick's senior staff. In conclusion, we observe a pattern of behavior by Senator Dave McCormick of supporting U.S. policies that are enabling a likely genocide by the Israeli government, basing its positions on false, misleading information, acting with a clear pro-Israeli bias in matters concerning the region. To date, he has voted against legislation, including 2 joint resolutions of disapproval for weapons for Israel, and voted in favor of legislation designed to tilt the diplomatic playing field with respect to debate at the UN, addressing Israeli compliance with international law and obligations. Thank you.